We're starting on a kind of a somber note today because of the terrible assassination a few days ago of Charlie Kirk. And I was trying to think a little bit about that and the evil that we have around us and the things that we hear. I was just a young person. I was a freshman in high school when we were sitting in class, in algebra class. I remember it like it was yesterday. And the announcement came over the PA that Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. It wasn't long after that that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then Robert Kennedy himself was assassinated. That all seemed to be a very dark time, as a young person growing up and people's feelings. And then we had the Vietnam War. That was a tragedy and a travesty for the American people, how poorly those Vietnam veterans were treated when they came back to America. I always remind people when they talk about these things in a negative sense that during that time it was a draft. Those soldiers didn't voluntarily go to war. They were drafted and had to go and serve. And when they came back, they were treated so poorly. We still have Vietnam veterans in our own lives now. That's my generation. This Charlie Kirk thing was a reminiscent of the Kennedy assassination in a couple of ways. I remember that funeral when his little boy John was saluting the casket as it was going past the steps in Washington, D.C., and then the Charlie Kirk's daughter is also 3 years old, the same age as John was. And you think of the travesty of taking the life of someone, a father, a husband, a son, a friend to so many thousands, someone who really tried to turn things around toward Jesus Christ. Whatever his religious affiliation is not important. What's important is for us to recognize that there's evil in the world. And we can't just say evil. I think we have to be very clear to recognize that there is a devil. In our baptismal service, at the reception of catechumens, we say, vile, loathsome, alien spirit. And that's what happens. That spirit comes into us because we allow it. It's what happened to this young man who did this atrocity and all of those others that I just touched on a little bit. So we want to make sure that we keep our footing solid, we not become despairing, and not worry about the end times. We worry about the time today, because how we end our life on that moment will determine on where we go in the next life. So keep yourselves vigilant and keep yourselves away from too much of this, too much of social media, too much of cell phones. I would advise parents to limit their children's time on all of those devices. Control that. Don't be afraid. Spend the time with them because they need that time from you. It can't be a babysitter. It has to be something that's going to be enlightening for them, something that's edification, something on their schooling maybe, or something good to listen to that will enhance where they are in their lives. So let's move on from these dark days now and to realize that the light is Christ. This is how Charlie Kirk lived. That's been obvious in everything that's been said about his life. We don't make heroes in life, for simple reasons of just wanting to have a hero. We do it because of deeds and how they work and what they've done. But when they do it in the name of Jesus Christ, for all the right reasons, we have to give credit. Welcome back to Orthodox Life with Bishop Nikolai. Today we're going to take a little different take. We're going to go into politics. Seems to be the big issue these days since we're in a divided country, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime for sure, but not from the political standpoint, but in a perspective of an Orthodox church, an Orthodox Christian in the Orthodox Church, and how they deal with politics and political issues. So we can get started.
Awesome. So to kind of frame the issue here, how should Orthodox Christians understand the role of politics in their spiritual life, day to day?
Well, there are no politics in spiritual lives. Politics are part of the secular world, and they do creep into the church. I mean, certainly we have political issues going on in the church all the time. Doesn't mean they should be there. They are. But we as Orthodox Christians want to keep ourselves in alignment with Christ, so that what perspective we're taking on what we're hearing in the news as it's being spoon-fed to us to believe, that we have to know what's right as an Orthodox Christian and what we should be looking at and why should we be looking at something or should we not be looking at things. So I think that's where we can start.
So why is it dangerous when Christians confuse focusing too much on politics or political ideologies with kind of biblical or spiritual purpose in life?
Well, that's kind of complicated. I often hear people totally distraught about the political situation in the country. A couple of things in particular. COVID was a real difficult time for people, especially when they found out how perverse the whole idea of these vaccinations were, and to find out that the government actually duped us into taking vaccinations. The Ukraine issue became a very serious issue in the church, as a church, and in the country as a nation. So I think we have to be careful when we deal with these issues to first make sure that our feet are on the ground centered on Christ. Then we can look at vaccinations and recognize that there are people out there who want to make money. And God said you can serve God or mammon, money, or God, and to realize that that's part of where that's coming from. It's not something that's coming from the church, not coming from God, but people wanting to make money. Now, there may be, and I'm sure there were, people even during the COVID vaccination who thought that they were doing good things. Generally speaking, we found out that there was too much evidence to say that this vaccine wasn't going to be so good for us. The Ukraine situation became very political. In fact, just recently, I saw the exchange with Archbishop Alexei of Alaska and President Putin of Russia in Anchorage. And I listened to it several times, only because the first time after I listened to it is when I found out that there was this big uproar from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in America because of the comments that Bishop Alexei had made to President Putin about the fact that Russia gave us Orthodoxy in America, and to think that I have to control myself, that these hierarchs would write a letter complaining about such a thing in a church regard, because without the Russian missionaries having come to America, would there even be Orthodox here today? I don't know. The fact is, they brought Orthodoxy here, and that is the beginning of Orthodoxy, and Alaska is the center of that Orthodox movement in America. So there again now, the churches are getting into this thing too. They want their pound of flesh. So they want to go after this bishop because he said something. Like I say, I listened to it several times. I didn't find anything wrong in what I heard. Did you listen to it?
Yes, I listened to it.
Did you find anything wrong?
Mm-mm.
I mean, it was all very, I don't think the interview itself flowed very nicely. Too many heads bobbing back and forth. But there was nothing said that was out of line. In fact, it was very positive. So then, we get ourselves all worked up with this. People tell me, I can't sleep, I'm listening to the news. Why aren't you praying? Forget the news. Open your prayer book. Take Psalm 50. Think about every verse in Psalm 50. Every verse is penitential. Every one of them. Take one verse, think about that, you'll fall right to sleep. Because you'll feel so grateful that you're still here and able to repent. But people get wrapped up. It's the same thing we talk with our kids about using these iPads and all these, devices. I heard on the news the other day, the average is 7 hours a day. 7 hours a day that the children are on social media. Can you imagine? I wonder what these parents are doing. They're not parenting their kids. They're just not. So we have to be careful. And I mean really careful. These things can take a hold of you and turn you right upside down. I think the biggest distraction, I'm going a little bit off track a little bit here, but the biggest issue we have with social media is pornography. It's rampant. And it's like taking that piece of candy, you get a little taste of it, and you want more and more and more. And you keep feeding your passions. And the more you feed your passions, the more they need. So same thing with social media. Same thing with politics. You've got a little bit of news is fine. I don't watch the news typically. I listen to some snippets of news just so that I'm aware of what's going on around me. But to sit and be drawn into some kind of into news stories and programs and that kind of stuff doesn't make much sense for me. Or well, Dimitri, you've got kids, talking about the social media thing. I know, but the viewers need to hear how you handle that, because I know how you handle that.
Well, I mean, they're not on any social media.
Right.
Then, yeah, I mean, there's no reason for them to be.
Yes. Yeah. And they're wild kids.
Is there an age that you plan on letting them on to social media, or?
We don't have a set time, a set age in mind, but I think it'll probably be, as they maybe something around 15, 16, maybe it'll be kind of around that time that we'll probably let them, explore some things. But I mean, our hope is that it'll just be natural for them. It'll continue to be natural for them to just want to do things that are in real life, because the way that my wife and I see social media is it's just entering an alternate reality, and this is why we aren't on it. This is why our children are not on it, because we want them to be grounded in reality. This is healthy for us. I mean, it's very unhealthy to be in alternate realities.
I remember when I had my first cell phone, it was a flip phone. And I often talk about, I'd love to be back with my flip phone again, because you could take messages, voice messages, and you could make calls. And when I went to the other iPhone, I thought, oh, this is awful, And then you get kind of grounded in that, because I can look at emails on there, and you can check things that you need to look at. You've got documents that you can, bring up and print from there. A lot of good, positive things. I shared this with you the other day, that the day of the feast, Transfiguration, there was a call from a woman who was really kind of pushy on her call. She called me at 12:50. Now, church was at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 12:50, I was checking my messages. And she left me this message that I called you. I picked the call. I got the call 2 hours later. It was 2 hours later that I took it, but it was from 12:50. And I get this call from her. She says, I called you 2 hours ago. Why has nobody called me back? Your website says the church is open today at 3 o'clock. Well, I called her right back, and from my car, actually. And I said, I just got you. Well, I called 2 hours ago, and I said, I chuckled. I said, I was just dealing with 100 people at church. And you need to know that they're the priority, not me returning phone calls. And I think if anybody knows me, no one returns phone calls or text messages better than I do, typically. I mean, I could make mistakes, but I'm really pushy about that stuff. And she said, well, your website said it's supposed to be open at 3 o'clock. I said, no, it was 3 o'clock last night was the vigil, but the office said, no, it's not on your website. It's all wrong. Okay, well, I'm sorry that you missed that, but your call was at 12:50. You would have still missed the feast day. It started at 9 o'clock. No, it says 3 o'clock. Okay. So I went on the website and looked at it, and I took a picture of it, because it was exactly like it was supposed to be. And I texted it back to her with a note saying that I don't expect an apology, but I just want you to see that the website was correct and you probably misread it, which is too bad that you missed the feast day. And she wrote back some crazy thing, and love and blessings. That was the end of the conversation. But just kind of silly stuff, I mean, you got the wrong day, first of all. Where's the preparation? So, but phones are handy. They can help us. They can help a lot of things, but they can be a distraction. Every time we drive down the street, inevitably there's some car that's sitting there at the red light, and we're ready to go, and they're not moving because they're checking their messages. So,
How can Orthodox Christians avoid being consumed by the 24-hour news cycle and also kind of balance that line to stay informed instead of being too, thrown into the political world?
Well, so like Vadika said, he just generally looks at news snippets. He's not generally watching, for lots of time, the news, or I do a similar thing. I have a subscription to a news outlet where I get emails, and pretty much every day I see snippets that come through the email, and rarely do I click on them to read any more. Generally it's just basically the headline and subtitle of what happened, but it kind of it helps me to be just aware of the most noteworthy items in the news. And this takes very little time. It's just you just see the basic idea, and what more. I would suggest that there's not any more that we need to be getting into the news than that.
And I think politically, I grew up in a mining town in Butte, Montana, and everybody there was a Democrat. And that was the case all the way up until the time I registered to vote. And at that time, when I was 21, I think at that time, and when I was growing up, I registered it as a Democrat because everybody was a Democrat. They were the party of the people. And when I went to seminary and realized that there can't be some affiliation, I became an independent because I wanted to have that freedom to choose, not by some party line either, and not to have somebody else look and see, what party you are. And especially nowadays, those kind of things that people want to look at and reveal, to make some issue of whatever. But I always advocate for people to vote because it's a right and a privilege as an American, as a legal American. And unless we vote for the better of two candidates, by not voting, we're kind of disregarding that opportunity to express, maybe a more positive will of God in the government of the country. I know in particular, the election before this one, when people were asking me, who should I vote for? I said, I would never tell you who to vote for. You have a free choice to vote for. You have to find the candidate that is more close to Orthodox principles than farther from them. You're not going to find that. There were some, Orthodox, contenders for the presidency over the years, and neither of whom were really practicing Orthodox Christians. So that never made a difference. So politics, strange bedfellows. So you try to find the one that's better for you out of those two. But I think people should vote. Otherwise, we lose out. But it can't be the everything in our lives. It's just something that's there. And I think local elections are critical too, because they have more to say for what's going on generally in your own community than even a national one. But again, it's up to people to make that decision.
And is there a spiritual danger that comes with, being too involved in that side of the world or political world and being too consumed in that?
Well, I think there's a spiritual danger in being consumed in any kind of work or any kind of program that you're dealing with, because you're going to compromise your place in Christ's world. Those places are pretty secular, and they're pretty pretty well infected by forces that are not positive. So you have to be careful where they are. If you're going to be part of something there, you have to, again, the more involved you are, the more your prayer life needs to be stronger, because the distractions are going to be there.
So speaking of those darker influences in politics, how can we discern truth when media outlets who are so deeply tied in the political world are often biased or manipulative?
Well, I don't know how we discern that, other than knowing what the church teaches and how we're supposed to behave, and if those entities are acting responsibly in that way. I think that's the only way you can discern. Otherwise, you can't. And unfortunately, again, something else that I was reading recently was that my age group are being fed by legacy media because they're at home, sitting down, watching TV all day long. And so everything that they're getting from the news is coming from legacy media, which is very biased toward the left. And it's kind of funny because the people my age that I know are not part of that group of people watching legacy media to get their news. So it's kind of sad, that we want to be spoon-fed. Same thing with our kids. You look at the educational, the grades of our kids, when they test them to see what grade they are, what grade level, they're way below grade level. But then whose fault is that? Teachers and parents not holding them accountable. You agree? He agrees totally. Yeah. I knew he would.
How can we stay tuned in but guard our hearts when reading or watching troubling news as Orthodox Christians?
Well, I think that what Father Dimitri was talking about earlier, you don't have to watch whole programs. And you have to be careful of the titles too. The things that you're looking at they're more based, coming from where we are. So you don't have to read into the title what's there. But there's a lot of stuff there. You read the title and it's completely different than what's below. So you have to be careful of that too. If you think you want to be informed, then you need to read both sides. That's what I would suggest. And when people want to tell me, what they believe, I say, I'm happy to hear that if you'll listen to what I have to say. Doesn't mean we're not on the same track, but you have to agree to allow me to have my time to tell you what I think too. They never want to talk after that. They want to tell you what you need to believe as from them.
So that does make it a little bit challenging, especially for devout individuals in the modern day to, kind of respond to current events, especially with family, friends, it's just kind of all around them. So how should we react when world events like the war in Ukraine or social unrest provoke anger, fear, or despair within us?
Confession. All of those things are sins. We're allowing the outside world to control our inner world. And when that happens, we're giving in. I know that, families are split politically about things. You have to have an understanding that you're not going to discuss politics. Two things we say we shouldn't discuss, right? Politics and religion. Same thing when I was just talking about religion. People want to tell you what they want you to believe. Politics is the same way. If you want to keep a good relationship that way in your family, your friendships, that's probably good to do that. Are you sure? He said you could be more aggressive. More aggressive? He said you'd have to take your stand and tell them what you believe. And he's right.
So kind of on that note, how do we avoid letting political divisions infiltrate our parishes and families? I'm sure you have some unique perspective on that.
Yeah, I made it very clear in this Ukraine thing, came to be this awful killing field, basically. That, there's no place for politics here in the church. And when you have people criticizing, the patriarch, and this church belongs to the patriarch of Russia and is advocating war, that was never said. But, people have their own thoughts and how they misinterpret things, but there's no place for us to carry that into the church. We're here to work on our individual spiritual life to get closer to Christ. And if we allow these political things from the outside to divide us, then we're not doing anything that's Christ-like. Like Father said, we even pray for those who are our enemies. We pray for them. They're still creating the image of Christ. We still pray for them. We don't have to like them. We're praying that, they'll be converted to Christ and that they'll come around to doing the things that are right and good. Each side, in any war, each side believes that what they're doing is for some just cause. They can't both be just causes. And war has got a lot of terrible things that happen. I started with the Vietnam War. That's my era. And watched the travesties of that war. To think that, Vietnam veterans would come back to this country and were treated so poorly by their own people, Americans. Do people realize that they were drafted? They didn't voluntarily go to that war. They were drafted. They had to go to that war. And they had to kill and do terrible things. And they came back with terrible things in their heads. We have some of those people still alive, who can't talk about things that they saw or things that they even did. So the last thing we want is to bring war into the church. Bring peace into the church. I had one lady last week told me that she took her memorial book out of the church because of the Russian church. Now, she's been here since the beginning. She came here a little over 10 years ago, so right from the beginning. She took her book away. I said, so you took your book away so we don't pray for your living and your departed because it's a Russian church? Who's been taking care of you spiritually all these years? Of course, she was sobbing by the time we were done and brought her book back the next week. But I couldn't believe it. It just totally astounded me. And we lost people. They left. They were, I don't know if they're going to other churches. They said they were going to. It's sad.
How do we participate responsibly in civic duties, in politics? If somebody were to, let's say, have a job within politics, how do they participate in that without compromising their faith?
I think there are different kinds of jobs that you talk about being in politics.
Yeah, so maybe like I know that there's campaign staff, there's obviously political candidates. How do anybody within that world?
I can tell you a personal experience. Mm-hmm. My parents were very much involved in a political campaign when I was a youngster. Very involved. And let me tell you how that happened. My father had retired as a miner, 40 years underground, retired with a very minimal pension. And my mother needed to work a second job, a part-time job, just so that we could make ends meet. And the job that she wanted to have was a janitress in a grade school, because they worked 4 hours a day, 8 hours on Saturday. And there were 2 schools close to where we lived. And so there was a fellow in the neighborhood who was running for the school board. And we knew them. We were friendly. I wouldn't say our families were friends, but friendly. My mom and dad were going out in the evenings and nailing these flyers for school board on the telephone poles. He won. He got her the job, and she worked there until she died. So that's as far as politically as my family got. So, but when you compromise your values in politics, that's where you go the wrong way. If what you're doing politically and in the political sphere, working for political candidates and in political offices, when you compromise your values, then you've gone astray. If you're doing this for the right reasons, you're advocating pro-life, in that in that particular politician's office, that's good stuff. Advocating that. Advocating to help the homeless. Those are good things. When you're doing other things like bringing some of this craziness that they bring into the schools for our kids, no, you've compromised your values.
So is it appropriate for Orthodox Christians to be politically outspoken, or should we focus more on prayer and personal holiness?
When Christ says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, people often take that as just just meaning financially, paying taxes. It's, of course, it's like the Lord is saying, it's okay to pay taxes even though your government may be doing evil things with the money, because this is his area, and you can give him money because he's demanding it of you without betraying Christ. But another way to look at this is that, render unto Caesar your time. How much time, sorry, let me say that again. Render unto him of your time what is his, and render unto Christ the time that is his. So people oftentimes, they put all this time into politics that is really due to Christ, not due to Caesar. And I think this applies very often to people getting in conversations online, just in general, arguing politics. This time should be given to Christ. It's not really being given to Christ when we're just arguing worldly affairs.
Well, I think people are very brave on the internet. Even that example I gave that lady calling me about, I should have called her back sooner. She would never have said that to my face. But she became very brave on texting me. And it didn't matter that she knows who I am or not. You just wouldn't do that normally to another person, to talk that way, talk down to a person. We have to be careful not to get into those discussions on the internet. They're very divisive, and they're very distracting. And you're not accomplishing very much. You can give an opinion and close it down and be done with that. But the banter back and forth typically doesn't produce much fruit. So we have to be very careful with that.
It's giving this time to the politics that ultimately is what led the government to have the power that it did during the COVID times, and where they shut things down. If people were less, obsessive about their position, their just all the craziness that gets talked about, there could be real muscle in people to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this. But people get caught up in weeds, and they're not able to tackle the real problem.
So when they do decide to engage or give an opinion, even though you obviously recommend it's at a minimum,
I think your yes has to be yes, and your no has to be no. I think silence is giving in. So I don't advocate that. When someone confronts you with something that you know is blatantly wrong, you have to say it. You have a responsibility to address that.
So how could a Orthodox Christian, I guess, express Christ's love or their faith in that discussion without kind of watering down the message of Christianity or kind of just proselytizing at them?
I think a 9mm is kind of a swaying issue, isn't it?
A what?
A 9mm, if you wave that in front of them, then don't you believe what I do? It's about what it would take.
How should Orthodox Christians view, I guess, their ruling political powers in light of Christ's kingdom? I know that you just touched on that with kind of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto Christ what is Christ's. So do you have any more to add on that?
That's part of our government and how it's set up. I personally think the Constitution is probably one of the most phenomenal documents that was ever written. How those early fathers could come up with resolutions to things that they weren't dealing with right there, but we were 200 years later. My position when people get carried up with that, I always tell them, there's another election. We have to, again, render to Caesar what is his. If the will of the people was to elect these people in position, then there's another election coming, and that can change things or not. Again, that comes back, usually those people that are complaining about that don't vote. So, I didn't vote because it makes no difference. Well, now you see what the difference made.
And it seems like in the modern age, there is a little bit of a problem with maybe idealizing certain candidates. Not talking about anybody in specific, but the way that, the modern world works, they really gravitate and maybe put ahead individuals in front of their faith or country, family.
We've had that in this country forever. I think the biggest candidate was John F. Kennedy in Camelot. When here was this young family coming into office, they were idolized. And then you see, we see how his demise came about. Not very positive for this country. Pretty awful. And he's not the only one. But we idolize people, how they look, the movie star kind of thing, Hollywood and politics, are not the same. When actors are reading from a script, that's what they should stick to. Stay out of politics. Let the politicians come up with their own issues. But will we do that? It's like, well, this one really appeals to me. Do you know he believes in abortion? Oh, I didn't know that, but I really like him or her. Same thing.
Yeah, it's really easy for a lot of people to fall for that. Just smooth talking, good looking character that they put in front.
Well, it used to be that politicians would promise you the world and then do nothing. Mm-hmm. I heard one comedian say that his grandfather believed that politicians should only spend 2 terms, one in office and one in prison. And there's something to that. When you see these lifelong politicians, 40, 50 years, there's nobody else that can do that. Don't look at me like that, like that's what I'm doing here too.
Is there anything that comes to mind from the lives of the saints that can teach us about enduring troubled political times that we're living in?
Well, when you look at the lives of the saints, you see they all had problems with the political times. All the martyrs typically were killed because of that. Mm-hmm. So you see, they didn't have much influence. That's not true. There were times that through those kinds of sacrifices that people did convert to Christianity. There were those times. But yeah, the early fathers all suffered. We're still suffering on Mount Athos because of the political climate. The climate there is split because of the Ukrainian church situation that was created by the church. Tragic.
In closing, what final encouragement would you give to Orthodox Christians struggling to balance faith and political awareness? I know that we've kind of delved into that throughout the episode, but do you have any kind of short closing thoughts or comments on that?
Stand your ground and don't lose hope. That's the most important thing. If you stand your ground and stay faithful, salvation is at hand. If you give up, become despairing, you're threatening your own salvation. Things will get worse again and harder, but they're meant to make us stronger. Every time an adversity comes to us, we're better having gone through that adversity in a positive way. We're stronger.
Definitely. Thank you. That's all I had. Your Grace. Thank you, Vladika. Thank you, Father. If you want to do a quick little outro.
No, we're moving along with the episodes very nicely, and hopefully people are watching them and getting something out of them, and continue bringing the questions in, because I think that's what keeps the dynamics going, and hopefully that'll continue. Until the next time,